What am I to do?
Welcome to Razor Branding Podcast with Jackie Russo. To learn more about how to improve your brand, visit brandrusso.com.
Today is a very special episode of the Razor Branding Podcast. Not like in the old days when you went to school and came home and there was a very special after-school episode of something. This is a whole different kind of special because today we're doing some positive things. We are talking all day long in this podcast marathon with local community nonprofits about the work they're doing, the causes they represent, the problems they're fixing, and hopefully getting them some much needed revenue to make up for events and fundraising that they couldn't do this year because of COVID. And so you can learn, you can listen, you can give. That's the whole point of today. And I am so excited that we are talking to Ashley Mudd with Leadership Institute of Acadiana. Hey, Ash.
Hey, Jackie.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So you like the after school special? I heard you giggle in my ear.
Yeah, I do. I love that. I was just thinking about coming home from school, middle school, and like jumping on a Saved by the Bell. So that's like the first thing I thought of.
Absolutely. I love those very special episodes. Usually it's like Kirk Cameron teaching me some sort of valuable lesson about how to be a better friend.
Yeah, we just got back from vacation and we were watching Saved by the Bell in the morning. And it was an episode, it was one when Jesse sort of went a bit crazy. And I was like, man, lots of life lessons learned through Saved by the Bell.
Absolutely. For me, because, I'm a little bit older than you, it was Facts of Life.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. You take the good, you take them bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. I was definitely a Joe, but I had friends in my life who were Blairs, and I just loved it. It was the greatest show ever. Ooh, I need to introduce my girls to that show. But we are slightly off topic. So let's talk about Leadership Institute. When we got to interview you on the podcast, actually, a couple of months ago, y'all had transitioned to Zoom classes and you were finding your way through that. Is that year done and you're now getting ready to start your next year?
We're not done yet. It feels like we talked 2 years ago. I can't believe that was this year. At that time, we were exclusively virtual. We were still sort of like at the height of the pandemic. Now we are doing yet another way, learning a bunch of new skill sets, and we're doing hybrid, but we're doing synchronous learning that's hybrid. So our class days, based on the participant's comfort level, can participate from 8 to 5 fully virtual from the comfort of their home or their office, or they can show up in person and go through the same session in person. So we've invested. I thought I had it right here to show you. We have a little tripod now, a tripod. We have 2 iPads. We have microphones. And so we set it up so you can go through sort of the same day on whatever your comfort level is.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's been quite an adventure. But, we really wanted, this was really thrust upon them. And so we wanted to provide an opportunity, no matter how it is that you are comfortable participating, you still get to get the most out of it.
Well, and I love that. I watched schools struggle with going virtual, rapidly in the spring when everything shifted so quickly, and then coming back now in the fall. And I was surprised more of them didn't go with that model. So I love that that's how y'all were able to kind of transition as we moved into phase 2 and 3, because to me, that makes the most sense. I saw a lot of schools struggle with an A-B schedule. So half the kids were there one day, and then the next day they're off. And so then the other half are there. But to me, that synchronous schedule is perfect because you can live stream the classes, Zoom, Facebook Live, whatever. And so I can learn the exact same thing if I'm sitting in my classroom at the desk or at home at the kitchen table.
Yeah, and there are definitely some challenges to it. It's not, the exact same as sort of all of us being in a room. I would tell you if you interviewed any of the members of class 33, they'll probably tell you that it's not as smooth as I'd like to say that it goes. There's been a lot of challenges along the way, but it was really important for us to find a way. In April, when we come out with a fully Zoom session, it's exciting and innovative because most of us had never been on Zoom. Well, that's going to quickly fade. You get Zoom fatigue and you're ready for the next one. And so it was important for us to keep evolving the programming that we were offering. Because the reality is, while so many things have been canceled and so many things have been put on pause, the need for good leadership is needed now more than ever. And so leadership is not canceled and leadership is not paused. And so, you've been through the program. And so, sort of the advantage of the deep dive you take in the community. But you can only imagine how rich that content is right now with global pandemic happening, civil unrest happening across the country and in our community, having to make tax cuts, sort of all of these things. It's really important for us to continue engaging the class and really building the next generation of leaders for our community.
You mentioned that I did go through the class. I was class 22, which was the best class ever, for anybody wondering.
That's debatable.
It's not. And so for anybody who's interested in going through the class, I welcome you to talk to previous students, get an application, be a part of it. I had to apply 3 times before I finally got in because it's a very prestigious program. It's tough to get into. And it's so worth it, though. The time and experience, whether virtual, in person, or hybrid, is incredible for knowing about your community, knowing about what makes Lafayette tick, and getting to know the people you need to get in contact with for the next thing you want to do. All of a sudden, you'll have relationships with those people. It really is amazing.
I was on a webinar about a week ago, and the speaker said something that really struck with me, that sort of his success in life came to what he collected. And he didn't collect things, but he collected connections and relationships. And that you never know a relationship that you build when you need to call upon it. And some of the favorite stories that I hear are graduates who went through the program 15, 20 years ago. And, they'll talk about, I met someone then and I had no idea how it would impact me later. I had the privilege of meeting a former graduate who went through the program, was working in a professional service industry, corporate job, liked it, but didn't know that there was a different option until she went through the program, and then ultimately went and opened her own professional service business, learned that she could be a small business owner, ultimately led her leaving that industry completely to open a retail business. And so it was a really interesting story that's sort of grown for her over the past 25 years that started in her Leadership Lafayette class. And you slowly build these connections, and you might not need to call upon that person that year, but you now have that relationship for life, for whatever comes your way.
Absolutely. So many of my clients have come from the relationships that we've built in those kinds of encounters. And I think about Kenny Hicks, who he and his wife Missy recently passed in a plane crash. But I first met him through my Leadership Louisiana class, did work for him at 3 different companies he worked for, founded, or bought along the way, and then got to do CEO Roundtable together. And those relationships that you form, it has this ever expanding impact on your person, your profession, your career, just everything. Lafayette's too small a town for us not to find new ways to connect every chance we get.
I never had the privilege of meeting Kenny, but he's actually a former board member of LIA. And I was looped into his leadership class, reaching out to each other. And the words that they shared about him and the impact, he actually wrote a poem about his experience that his classmate, Jean-Claude Arsenault, shared out with us. And it was incredible to read the words that he wrote about the experience, about the impact that we can all have on the community when we're willing to come together. And I was really grateful to see that sort of all these years later, they still reached out to each other to lean on each other and to support each other through that loss.
Right. Well, and that's how it was for us. When we got through our CEO roundtable, everybody was so close, and Kenny really had become the de facto president of our class. He was not voted on or nominated. We all just knew he was, like, we couldn't even figure out why he was there because he was so much smarter than the rest of us. And so we had our own class memorial via Zoom the next day after the crash because we were all just so shocked by the loss. And so that's what Leadership Institute of Acadiana to me does, is it brings people together. They're going to touch your lives for decades to come.
That's amazing to think about what I've seen. So this is my 5th year sort of connected to the program. I went through the program right before starting this job and then wrapping up 4 years of the program. So I've been able to meet and see so many different people on different paths of lives. And it's incredible to see how quickly your class will rally around you. And if you think about it, it's sometimes people that you had no idea who they were 6 months before. People who've gone through life changes, positive, welcoming babies into the world. We always have a couple of babies that are welcomed every year. People who've experienced loss, they've lost family members, they've lost jobs. And the way the class rallies around them, I've seen meal trains. People get together and make sure that you have meals, people who have collected money. I have been blown away by the compassion and grace of this year's class, who stepped up to do multiple food collection drives for victims of Hurricane Laura, who made trips out to Lake Charles multiple times, who mucked out houses. I had a friend who works for the United Way in Lake Charles who reached out, and she said, I'm really struggling. Our usual volunteer base, they're not here. They're dispersed all over. Can you help me find volunteers? And I sent a text message to 2 members of this year's class, and they had a team there the next morning. It's just incredible. And I am very privileged every year to sort of see the humanity that we all still have, that we feel like it gets lost, sort of on social media and in the news. We feel like everything's crumbling around us. And then I get to see really what people are doing with their day-to-day life and how they are investing in each other and showing up out of choice. And it's a really privileged place to sort of sit in.
And I think about privilege, and that's a word that's been used a lot this year. To me, the greatest privilege any of us can have is resources, right? And so I think if we were having this conversation about Leadership Lafayette and a different time, we'd be talking about jobs. It'd be all about professional. Leadership Lafayette is all about increasing your professional capacity and capability. But what we're really talking about ultimately is resources, and it's the resources of connection. Because that is one of the greatest privileges we have is education, healthcare, those essentials, and connections to other people becomes this amazing resource to help you not just get jobs, but find a better place in the world, find a mate, find your place in the community, and make the community a better place. And so I think Leadership Institute of Acadiana is the top of the list in terms of doing great stuff in the community. So anybody who's watching today needs to make sure that they dig deep and give. And there's a link in the comments on Facebook to support this endeavor, because I know that this has impacted you all just like it has every other nonprofit. And so I've got to imagine that those donations are going to be greatly needed.
Yeah, we're very fortunate up until now to have a fee-for-service revenue. And so we would essentially sort of, sell admission into our program to run our organization. There are some challenges to that model. Not everyone has the resources to cover the full cost of tuition. In any given year, 30 to 40% of our participants need financial assistance in order to go through the program. And so there's always a need to be able to support participants going through. As we grow and as we continue to serve the community, we've actually seen that number increase each year, more and more participants for a variety of reasons. We are really excited that we're growing our base, and we're really challenging what people think it means to be a leader. And so we are reaching out to classroom teachers, to nurses, to owner-operators, to people in such different industries that might not have the corporate support if they work for one of the hospitals, right, to have their employer pay for them to go through the program. And we are incredibly excited to grow in that way. But as we do, the need for financial assistance and philanthropic support from the community will grow with it. And just to touch on, your point of connections, man, 2020 has taught us the importance of connections. And I think that, not just for our professional well-being, but for our spiritual and mental and health well-being, that sort of, the more connections that we have to people, I think that the easier that it gets to navigate all that is happening around us. And that, gift that comes from this program is that you build connections you never expected. A personal gift in building connections. I've been talking about this a lot. I actually went through the program in 2016. So 4 years ago during our last presidential election. And, what I loved about going through that program is that it really allowed me to, on the front end of the year, so January till about March or April, it's not on your minds yet. You're not talking about it. So you have a solid 4 months where you really build relationships with people, and you grow to love them. You grow to learn about them. You grow to understand what shared values you do have well before you start talking about where you're different, where you have different values, where you have different beliefs. And so hopefully at that point, you've learned to understand that person, to understand what makes them tick. So when you start to talk about your differences, you have a lot more grace in that process and a lot more understanding that connection you built with them for 4 months isn't somehow thrown away now. And how is it that you can sort of have a deeper discussion on maybe your shared values aren't all that different? You're just getting to it in a different place.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what we learn when we have these discussions on social media is when we don't come from a place of shared values and trust and knowing someone well enough to know their intention. It's just words on a screen. That's where the bad stuff happens. And so when we can have those conversations face to face, we do it far more respectfully. We do it far more intellectually, I think. Well, not counting last night's face to face conversation. That was not respectful or intellectual. That was a cluster. But for the most part, normal, regular humans. And so I love the connection you're making through connections of the classes, because that is where we get to know people that we didn't go to school with, that we didn't grow up in the same neighborhood with, and we didn't play on the same team with, because those are typically the pods, right? And so now all of a sudden you're meeting people from all these different walks of life and different backgrounds and different professions, and you're getting to know people in a whole new friend group. I think those relationships are invaluable to shaping how we see the world. I mean, it all goes back to SimSoc.
Okay, so for all of you who have no idea what Jackie's talking about, you need to apply for Leadership Lafayette so that you can learn how it all goes back to SimSoc. No, it does. And it's so interesting having gone through that program and then seen 4 groups after me go through it. And then now was watching what's happening in the country. When we allow ourselves to get a bit uncomfortable, I think that we're willing to think about things differently. And that it also, that program really pushes you to your edges. I think it makes you get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's where change is going to happen. And so what I'm about to say, like, I'm guilty of this as well. So this isn't, me saying other people are doing this. I do this as well. We tend to live our life in an echo chamber. And so it's not intentional. We have our friend group that we've consciously or not sort of curated. We most likely are with a partner that has some similar values as us. We work with people who have similar values and ideas as us. And so before you know it, you're sort of in a group where you're all talking about the same things from the same perspective. And so what I love about our program is that you at some point are going to hear someone say something that makes your skin crawl. It might be a classmate. It might be an elected official. It might be a CEO of an organization. They're going to say something that rattles you a little bit. But you can't just walk away. On social media, sort of there's fight or flight. Jackie says something that enrages me. I can unfollow her, or I can go in on the comments and attack her. It's a little bit different in person, sort of you have to sit through it and experience that discomfort. And I hope if we're doing our program right, that you really sit through that and think about, why is this triggering me? What is this that I'm learning from this situation? And how can I push back? Is it worth my energy to push back? Because sometimes, really, from my perspective, the right thing to do is to say, I've learned a lot about this person, and maybe the best thing to do is to safeguard my energy and walk away.
Well, I think it's about learning so much about yourself and your own reactions. I can't change how other people think, but I sure can learn how I react to it and let that drive my future engagement. The echo chamber thing is really big to me on social media, because I live in social media so much for work. I teach social media classes. I work very hard to curate a balanced social media. And so last night, as you can imagine, it was crazy as I had the entirely same comments about the opposite candidate all night long. One of my friends posted at one point, an added bonus surprise that no one saw coming. We all can unite and agree that this is horrible. And that's exactly what it felt like. But to hear people talk about the other guys doing this, and then the next comment on my feed was the other guy's doing, and it's the same thing. And you're like, oh, okay. So we're all pretty dug in, have already made decisions before this show even started.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, if we allow ourselves to sort of like use that experience to look in the mirror and think about, what can we control and what are we observing in leadership at any level, national, state, local, that we're not happy with, and how can we be different leaders? How can we display a different type of leadership and show up differently? When we were getting ready for this, Michael and I were having the same conversation that sort of like that, at least last night, we were a little bit more united because we were all frustrated. And I think that the frustrating part is that we know that there are some really great, compassionate, graceful leaders out there. And all too often, if you find yourself in that position, you're that graceful, compassionate leader, you talk yourself out of it. We get caught up in the idea of, they're going to fix it. And we don't realize there is no they, it's us. We need to step up. And so, I'll hear a lot of discussion here with any issue, no matter what side you're on. Someone is frustrated with how something is happening. And it's sort of, well, what can you do to step up and change that? What can you do to challenge that? And, one particular class member comes to mind in this year's class who I've always been so impressed with. He really gets the concept of we are they. And so he holds his elected leaders accountable and calls upon them and calls into council meetings and stays informed. And I think that that's a right and a privilege we all have, and that we could leverage more instead of just taking to social media and sort of ranting about what we don't like. But what can we do? Are we registering to vote? Are we showing up to vote? If we're angry with what we saw last night and we're not excited about the two-party system, what are we doing in the 4-year gap between those two elections? That sort of, we have a lot more power that I think that we slowly and unconsciously give away.
I could not agree more. And I think that when we talk about the Leadership Institute of Acadiana, it is about growing leaders. And that's exactly what this program has done. I'm saying it right now, live on the air for the first time ever. The 2020 presidential nominees need to all come from previous leadership classes. How awesome would that be? Not just Leadership Lafayette, although I think that would be amazing, but Leadership Louisiana, Leadership Texas, because those leadership classes, I think, are really exposing us to what needs to be happening at the local, state, and national level. And so let's put that knowledge and information to good use.
So that's a really good segue to say on a project we've been working on that's been spearheaded by Leadership Rhode Island, which is a state program, is a national leadership network. And, the idea is that these programs exist all across the country. I mean, you can't, sort of go a mile in any direction and not find one. We are fortunate. We have Leadership Lafayette and sort of within the Leadership Institute of Acadiana. Right down the road, Leadership Youngsville has a program for their community. Leadership Vermilion is serving their parish. Leadership Iberia. We have Leadership Louisiana. I've started learning about industry-specific programs in the state. I know that there's one for the hospitality industry. So there's all these programs across the country where we are changing how people think about leadership and giving them those resource of connections. Why haven't we been connecting them together on a national scale? Why are we not bringing them together? So if you are a realtor and you go through Leadership Lafayette, Louisiana, what if we can connect you with a realtor that went through Leadership Lafayette, Indiana, and talk about some of the similarities and the differences of your experience, and how can you be a resource to each other? Because the solutions to our problems are out there. We just have to be willing to sort of reach out and understand how can we scale what maybe someone else is doing in their community and bring it here. And maybe it's not even that big. Maybe the idea is how can you go back and change your business, and how can you scale what someone is doing with their business in another community? And so it's been a really interesting group to sort of tie it back to our conversation about the debate. They brought together national experts on elections, on election safety and election integrity. And we were able to bring in graduates of all of these programs to sit through this virtual session, which is a benefit of virtual learning, to have a really intimate discussion over what do we want the future of our country to look like. We did breakout rooms, and I was in a room with people from Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, and it was the first time I learned how different elections happen in the Northwest, how very different it is in Louisiana. And, I would say I'm a pretty educated, open-minded person, and they're explaining elections to me, and there's a woman in the group about my age who had never voted in person for a presidential election. She had always done mail-in ballot. And I had never knew that was a possibility. I went to college my freshman year, first time I voted in a presidential election. I drove an hour and a half home to vote. And so it was just a special experience for us to both have this conversation where we live in the same country, had totally different voting experiences, and neither was right or wrong, but we got to learn from each other. So your entire life, you've experienced this one way. My entire life, I've experienced this one way. How is that now influencing the stories we tell about how we think this election is going to go? So it's a pretty eye-opening experience.
No, and it's true. And if you've ever moved away, there are challenges because do you register in the new place you live? Do you vote by mail to the old place you used to be? When I lived in California, it was always this conundrum because I still wanted to stay registered in Louisiana and vote here, but I lived there. And so it does present challenges. When kids go away to college, it presents challenges. Voting is a right and a privilege, and no one should forsake it. And so whatever you have to do to be able to get to the polls or get a ballot to early vote, absentee vote, whatever you need to do, you cannot forego the right and the privilege that's afforded to us as citizens. It's too important.
And really, I like to say that it's the people who don't show up to vote that determine the outcome of the election. I'm a nerd. I like to pull voter data to see. There's a lot of interesting data on the last presidential election, but at the rate that people don't show up to vote, if they did, it truly has the power to shift elections. And I don't just mean, in the way when we think of president, all right, there's two candidates, to shift it in the other direction. It's always what we talk about. But if you really are passionate and you're passionate about showing up and voting for a third party candidate, well, then do it. Sort of whatever voting means to you and whatever way you need to vote with integrity with yourself that honors and is aligned with your personal values, do it. Participate in the system. I think that we think that we're one person and we're unique and we're special, and so we're making this decision to not show up, and we forget that we're one of the masses, and that when we do participate and we do show up, it has a ripple effect. And I say that understanding how easy it is to become apathetic. I have an 18-year-old sister who just 2 weeks ago I was trying to convince to register to vote, and all I could think of last night was, man, how am I going to convince her to vote now? That sort of, you get that frustration. And so I think that the antidote to that is that your vote is sort of your buy-in into the system and your ability to change it if you choose to keep showing up.
Right. And if you don't like either of the candidates who are up for grabs this time, spend the next 4 years helping to be involved in the system that means there's a third option next time. Because that's ultimately, if that's what you want, you can work to make that happen. It's one of the great things about our country. So I would be remiss if I didn't highlight a couple of comments. Anita Begno, Ashley Mudd, you are kicking butt. Love you. And Chris Balfour, that program, that sounds like an amazing program. And so how do people get into the loop for next year's class? Are y'all already taking applications? Is that already closed? And we're working on 22 now?
Yeah, no. So I'm really grateful you asked that question. We have not opened applications yet. And so if you are used to paying attention, we're usually a month in. We went very slow and intentional this year to make sure we knew how to plan for a pandemic. So we are wrapping those applications up. They should be opening in the next week or two. So the best way to stay informed, bookmark our website, leadacadiana.org, bookmark our Facebook page, all of everything that sort of we have. If you put Lead Acadiana, you'll find us. As we're getting ready to open those, we are going to have, what's going to be different than last year, in years, previous years, we're going to have several chances to participate in virtual sort of info sessions. So we can really dive deep into what people can expect for 2021 and how we are planning our programming around the pandemic. So we have pushed that process back a little bit, but we are pretty pumped about it. We are moving forward full steam ahead with the program to make sure that leadership doesn't stop and that it is not canceled. We will kick off in February and run through our normal year and wrap up in October.
Good. So I want to make a plug and then open it up for you to kind of answer a question that I think is fascinating of how you set up the year. So the plug is, if you have a company, pay for your employees to attend, because they can't necessarily front the whole thing by themselves, and your company will benefit from the connections they make and the leaders that they become. And so create a culture in your company where you're encouraging people to apply, you're giving them the time off so they can participate, and you're providing a scholarship for their tuition. We're a little bitty baby business and we do it for our people. So I know you can do it for yours at a bigger company. And then that leads me to, Ashley, if you would please, highlight how the months work, like the different topics that people learn about every month, because to me, that's one of the most awesome things about it.
Yeah. So before I do that, just to sort of give you and Brand Russo a shout out for being so supportive of the program. And we have so many graduates now that are there. We have people who have previously been employees that have come through the program, and it makes a difference. people are hoping that their employer supports them to come through the program. It makes a world of difference on whether or not they can make that commitment. So thank you for saying that. So what I love about our program is that it is a year long. So you really have time to build close relationships with the class and sort of let things marinate. And sometimes it takes a while for things to click for you. So we kick off the year. In a normal year in January, we are starting at the end of February next year. Just so we have a little bit of distance from the holidays. We don't know quite yet what's going to happen with the pandemic. So we are going to start with an overnight retreat at the end of February. We are coming back with overnight retreat next year. We are thrilled about it. Our retreat facility has been a champ in helping us navigate safety and making sure that we can do it safely. So we do a 2-day overnight retreat. That's really the foundation of the program. And so every year, what I always tell people, that's the first date you should check. If those 2 dates don't match up with your calendar, it's not the year for you, because if you can't attend the retreat, unfortunately, we can't allow you to continue in the program because it's just too important of an experience. From there, we meet once a month for a full day. The only thing that might look different next year, what we're putting in our application is what we found the best way to sort of let people know what to expect without sort of pushing ourselves into a corner. Our programming isn't going to depend on the phases. And so as long as we are in phase 3 moving forward, we will meet fully in person, 8 to 5, socially distanced with masks. If at any point we start backstepping into phases, we have an alternate plan for some shorter virtual days and what that looks like. So what happens each month? We take a deep dive into different topics about the community. We have a day focused to community health and wellness. We learn about how healthy or unhealthy our community is, what people in the community are doing to increase community health. How can you participate in that? We take a deep dive into our public education system. We have 2 days that focus on government. One is on our local government infrastructure and just how complex and unique we really are compared to all other governments in the country. We have another day, one of my favorite days. We take a deep dive into state government. And the goal of that day really is to empower and activate participants so that they know they have a say in what happens at a state government level. We talk about so many different topics that's happening in the community. And the idea is that we want to put you in front of people who are in institutional leadership positions so that you can understand the challenges they're facing, how you can influence them. But really, and this is how I measure our success, how is it that you can step into one of those institutional leadership positions? What's happening this month in the leadership class, next week, we're going to have our economy day. We take a deep dive into the economy. Leading up to that day, what we do are small, intimate visits with local CEOs of some of our largest companies. So what's really exciting is we reach out to CEOs from across the community who are very gracious with their time. Actually, today, the class is going to have an opportunity to sit down with Matt Steller. We limit the group size. So it's a benefit for you coming through the program. It's no more than 10. So you can really have a deep discussion over what is it like to lead a business in our community? What does our local government and state government do that helps your business? What are they doing that's hindering your business? What as a community are we doing that makes it easy for you to recruit talent? What are we doing that makes it a little bit harder and you have to get really creative on convincing talent to relocate to Lafayette? Those are some of our highest rated sessions because it's really candid. You have an opportunity to really understand what it's like to be, in charge of an industry here that our community depends on.
And to be clear, this is a person who is the son of a dentist, started a company out of the trunk of his car, and it is now a global enterprise that employs almost 2,000 people, one of the top 5 largest employers in Acadiana. So, you don't get access to people like that just on a whim or a Tuesday. You get it on a Wednesday through this program.
Yeah, and it's they are amazing. And that's, last week we met with David Calicod, the president of Lafayette General, and we got to talk about the upcoming merger. This week, both Bill and Charles Finstermaker sat down with the group. I am really excited about the one that happened yesterday. It's a new connection we made last year. Lauren Burser, that owns Something Borrowed Blooms, which I am just obsessed with their business model. I also use them when I got married. So like a rabid customer, like love what they're doing. She brings them to tour her warehouse. And so a lot of people don't realize the businesses that are headquartered in Lafayette and the amount of people they are employing in this community and how they're investing back into the community, the nonprofits that they are supporting, that they are donating to, many sort of, that you are highlighting today. We have some incredibly charitable business leaders here who also have a lot to say on how we can improve our community. And my favorite part of these CEO visits is that all of our leaders are pretty candid. And typically they end each one by saying, here's how you can step up and lead. What is it that you are going to do? The reason why I love having these sessions, specifically with Bill Fenstermaker, is he talks about, his decades-long career investing in Lafayette, in Acadiana, in the state of Louisiana through Louisiana Blueprint. And at the end of every session, he always talks about passing the baton. So now what is it that you are going to do to move this community forward? Because it really is up to us. And sort of, if we want this community to grow and improve, we have to really step up and do that ourselves.
We are they.
We are
you
they.
Want them to fix it. Well, that's us. We are they. I love this. And it's so funny. When we talked at the podcast months ago, we were all still just pandemic freak out mode. And so I love how y'all have gotten it together, figured it out, powered through, and have had such a successful year that you've figured out how to do it next year even better, no matter which way the pandemic and the different phases go. So kudos to you and your team. What do you have, like 30, 40 people working with you over there at Leadership Institute?
Oh yeah, huge staff. No, it's just me and a very dedicated group of volunteers who love the program, who love our community. And so on top of their full-time jobs, choose to give back through our program.
Well, and I think everybody should realize just how much of an impact that program has had. That's why people serve on your board. That's why people continue to show up and be a part of these monthly sessions and provide their knowledge and leadership and expertise. Because the only way we continue to grow as a community is by putting a hand out and helping the next leader emerge. And I think that's exactly what Leadership Institute has done. And so kudos. But it's not just Leadership Institute of Acadiana. You have some programs in that whole thing other than Leadership Lafayette are you still doing juniors?
Not right now.
Okay.
We're not. We do have other programs. And the new space that we are tiptoeing in that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to plug an event. We know that Leadership Lafayette, well, it is our flagship program, and there is no way to replace that experience. It's not accessible to everyone at all times. We know that committing a year and being able to fund $2,000 in tuition could potentially be a barrier. We do think it's worth it. And if you're thinking about it and you want to go through it, reach out to me so we can get you ready. But in the meantime, we want to offer other programming, especially for graduates like you. So you go through the program. You have Simone and Jessica on your staff who've graduated from the program. We've got to keep you engaged and connected. We've learned a lot with virtual programming. And so now we are crossing into this space where what does it look like to not have virtual programming as sort of a response to crisis, but to have intentional virtual programming all throughout the year. And so we did free programming throughout this year to do some lessons learned, and we're hosting our first sort of paid program on October 14th. And this is very timely and relevant. We are having a program called Values-Based Leadership and Political Conflict. We are bringing in a facilitator from St. Louis, Missouri. He works closely with their Leadership St. Louis program to guide anyone who comes through the program through navigating your personal values through political conflict. We are going to do some live polling on some controversial issues. So expect to be uncomfortable if you come through it. But it is open to anyone and everyone. And that is important to us, that we start reaching out on a much larger level. One, let's build a relationship with you now. So when you're ready for Leadership Lafayette, you already know us. You're already comfortable with us. Let's re-engage the Jackies and the Simones and the Jessicas who've been through the program so that we can still keep you energized and keep you activated so that you want to be a leader in the community. And then let's get the person who maybe has never heard of us before, and this is their entry point, so that they can start to have a relationship with us. All goes well. In 2021, we want to start offering episodic programming like that throughout the year for whatever level of leadership that you are. If we say that you can lead from wherever you are, we've really got to provide opportunities so that you can do that. No matter if you're 21, you just graduated college, and you are starting your first job in Lafayette, trying to decide if you want to stay here, there's an opportunity to engage you, or if you're 65 and you're getting ready to retire and you want to find new ways to reinvest your energy, there's an opportunity for us to plug you.
I love that. As an alum, I love any ongoing additional programming we can have because I want to stay connected to LIA and find ways to continue to help it grow. And I encourage anybody who's watching or listening to donate today because those dollars can help fund future scholarships. Encourage your employees to apply for the class and pay their tuition. It is so important that we make sure that our employees can have the time off and cover the tuition and be a part of this program. It's too important to the future of our community.
Oh, absolutely. I hope that our lessons learned from this year inspires us for the types of leaders that we do want instead of focusing on what we don't, and that we go out to make sure that we can be those leaders. And thank you for making that plug. And if you are listening today and you're not an employer, but you're an employee who wants that support, send me an email. I'll help you. I have helped people find the words to go back to their employer to talk about why this is important. I can connect you with Jackie, and she can talk about why she sends her team members through this program and why it's so incredibly valuable and how it can impact you professionally and your place of employment to have sort of the benefits that you get going through this program.
And if I know your boss, I'll just pick up the phone and call them directly.
Well, there you go.
I mean, with your permission, of course. I won't do it behind your back. But I would love to make that personal outreach because that's how important I think this is. I think that the way that we continue to move Lafayette in the right direction is by growing our leaders from the inside out. And the way we do that is through access and resources and knowledge and connections. Every business in this town needs to be able to pick up the phone and call another business person for something at some point. And this is how you know who to call.
Yeah. And that sort of that shift, I love how you worded that. That sort of any business, even if they are who you would consider a competitor, sort of as we are defining what it means to be a leader in 2020, the value of collaboration is unexplainable. That sort of, if we really lean on each other and understand how is it that we can help each other grow, because that's how our community gets lifted up.
Yeah, absolutely. Rising tide lifts all ships. And look, it's co-opetition, right? Not competition. And so how do you work together towards the end? There are ad agencies in this town. Julie Calzone's a great example. She and I partner on things all the time together. We have very different skill sets, different resources, different backgrounds. And so we collaborate. And that's how it should be. She has her clients, I have mine, but there's tons of things we work on together.
Yeah. She actually gave you a shout out in the comments.
I just saw that. Yeah, she's very kind. And Jessica Hauervest talks about her experience. She said, "Thanks, boss, for letting me have the opportunity. Leadership Institute of Acadiana is amazing. Thank you for all you do, Ashley." And so we are thrilled that you were here today. Thank you to everybody who watched. If you need a chance, go into the comments and you can see the links exactly how to donate money to them right now, how to apply for the next session. And as always, make sure you're encouraging your employees to be a part of it. Ashley, thanks so much for making the time with us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
All right. And look, next up after Leadership Institute of Acadiana is Catholic Charities of Acadiana. So come back at 10 a.m. and we'll be glad to talk to them next. We're going all day till midnight, y'all. Be a part of it.
When the day is through.